last year, at least 300 plus thousand people got laid off. That's the minimum. There are estimates actually saying, just like this one, are saying about 700,000, if not more. So there has been crazy, crazy layoffs last year. And this year, I think we're going to top that with all these tech layoffs and all that other crazy stuff that with the AI revolution that's starting off. So normally when you have these crazy, crazy layoffs, there should be innovation, there should be stuff going on. And that brought me to thinking, in the early 2000s, we had a whole bunch of different technology, right? So we had Motorola, we had Nokia's, and we had a whole bunch of like tech gadgets that we used, right? So what do I mean by that? I mean, we had Nokia, dominated the cell phone market in the early 2000s. They had over 40% of market shares, right? So that was in the early 2000s. And Motorola was leading player in the mobile industry. And, the Palm, one of these things that you type on was there, and Ericsson. So we had some major players in that industry. And now we're pretty much down to two, right? Samsung and the iPhone. So now that brought me to thinking, how can somebody start their own company and actually compete? Like how can you compete with these giants for tech innovation? Because these layoffs are keep continuing, right? And so you got to do something, because if nobody's going to be there to buy your product because everybody got laid off, how are you going to make money besides universal income, right? And so that brought me thinking, if we're going to be on track this year to lay the same amount of people off, there's got to be a way how you can compete with all these bigger companies, because they're gonna keep increasing profits and moving jobs to Mexico, moving jobs overseas, and you're gonna be kind of left holding the bag and jobless, right? You can't do nothing about that. And you guys in the comment section have told me many times how long you're job searching and there's just nothing available. And I believe it, because it's a tough, tough job market. And who's does not believe that, let me know in the comments below where you can get an easy job. And I'm not talking about a job that pays like $15 an hour, a job that, that makes a living wage. I got to say it that way. So how do you start to compete with Apple or Nvidia or something else that, has huge market shares? So the first step is you either need to have the money like Elon Musk, or you got to go raise money for your idea. And that's already where the system is so flawed. Because if you have a good idea, yeah, you can submit, and you can win. What are these called? You can apply for grants and maybe they'll give you one. But grants aren't going to keep giving you money while you're trying to be profitable, right? So if you're trying to set up a manufacturing line or something else for a new smartphone or something else, it's just not going to happen. And why do you want to compete? Because we are now, before you saw that whole list of companies that were basically servicing that industry, now we're like down to a few. And the few we have such a monopoly. And now, this is the kicker, what I truly believe. I truly believe that these people lobbied the government so much that if you want to start your own company, you need to get VC funding, or you already need to be so rich that that you can fund it till it's profitable. Because there's so much bureaucracy that goes into everything nowadays, that the city government and the federal government wants you to do testing, do all this other stuff. So you gotta get all these paperwork stuff done in order to compete. You can't just, even with medical devices, you can't just make your own medical device. You gotta have millions upon millions of dollars to compete. And that's why I feel like people, when they say, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur, in what? You want to do a lawn care service? You want to do some tree trimming? You want to start your own tech company? that doesn't really work without big money. And big money comes with big requirements, big, how do I say that? It comes with a bunch of big rules. And when it does go right, then you have people basically telling you what to do because they gave you the money, and they gave, you had to give up stock and all that kind of stuff. And you see it with Elon Musk, when he has, when he's battling with his company, and when he's, when he can do SpaceX, he can do whatever he wants because it's a privately held company. But you need money. You need a lot of money. So you cannot just go out there and compete. And you're like, hey, I got let go by Meta. Let me start your own social media platform or something. That just doesn't happen. That needs huge amount of capital. And that means you're going to have to get rid of a bunch of your equity in your company. So at one point, it's not even going to be your company no more. So if you want to start that and you're going to go to VCs and you're sitting in their office, they're going to say, well, first of all, you have to be, your idea has to be so revolutionary that they're willing to take this on, right? And if they don't like it, they're not even going to they're not even going to, bother entertaining it. And they're just going to say, yeah, no. And if you do have a great idea, they might take a huge percentage. You saw Shark Tank. Most of these companies fails because of, all these, the founder wasn't right, the team wasn't right, the money wasn't enough. And when you look at the Shark Tank deals, they're getting bigger and bigger. The money that they require to operate now is bigger than when it first started because the cost of business is so high. And to get licenses to do stuff that, to get licenses and do things that you want to do is so much more expensive. So depending on what you want to do, if you need an FDA approval for a med device, that's going to take you years and millions upon millions of dollars. And if you haven't tested it or launched it yet, or you don't have the financial backings, how are you going to do that? So everything is kind of set against you because a bunch of people say, oh, you got to be an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur in what? I mean, an entrepreneur for me is somebody that goes out and changes an industry, right? But if you're self-employed, then you're a plumber, an electrician, a home builder, a home flipper, stuff like that. But if you're trying to be an entrepreneur and revolutionize something, how can you compete with all these other companies? You just can't. And that's why there's going to be even more layoffs. And how are people gonna find something? Because people said, oh, you just got to go you just got to go the entrepreneurship route and be an entrepreneur. That doesn't mean nothing. That's not a good enough skill to have, because entrepreneurship doesn't buy you anything. So entrepreneur is kind of dead. I think entrepreneurship is dead. I don't think that you can be nowadays that you can compete with Apple. I don't think look at how much money they got. I don't think that you can compete with Apple. And I don't think you can compete with an internet provider. I don't think you can compete with a cell phone company. So what is there that you can compete with? With the city landscaper, that might be the only valuable option for you, because everything else is just so heavily already regulated, so much bureaucracy that you need so much money to revolutionize it that you can't do it. And yeah, I know you can, you're like, let's revolutionize internet. Let's do that, like Elon Musk did, and you get Starlink, right? But how are you going to get these satellites up into space? Oh, you need another company, so you have to pay. So it is not easy to come up with something that has a low barrier of entry but a high amount of return, right? And revolutionizing companies, or revolutionizing something isn't as lucrative as it once was. So like in the early 2000s, where we had so many players. And some of it is our own fault, because we've spent the money and made, Nokia, we made Razer, and all these other companies go out of business because they just didn't have a good enough product. And now there's only a few left. And when you only have a few companies left that service the industry, they can have bad customer service, they can pretty much do what they want, and you still got to be ending up buying their product at whatever price you can because there's no other competition. And then there is the federal government that bans other companies because it's a national security threat, right? And so they can't sell their phones, they can't sell their stuff. So then you're kind of left with American stuff that basically they're forcing down your throat to buy because everything else is just too expensive, or not, they're not even allowed to import it, right? So now you're basically forced to buy expensive stuff, have no job, and are basically forced to work as a contractor or as a so-called entrepreneur, and you're kind of screwed regardless of how you look at it. So these layoffs will continue, and all these people that got laid off are going to have the hardest time finding new jobs. And that kind of makes me sad to think about it, because it's just so hard to find something that's like revolutionary and trying to come up with something that is so unique that you can actually corner the market and actually build something. But if you know something, let me know in the comment section, because it's just nowadays it's just crazy. And I think as time goes on, these companies make even more money. These Microsofts, these internet companies are making even more money. And then you might tell me in the comment section, Rico, your stance is absolutely wrong because we have antitrust, and all that. We have the FCC and the Federal Trade Commission, and we have, so there's got to be, that you can compete and do all that. The government, when they say, oh, we'll make sure that, one company doesn't take up too much market share, absolute garbage. No, that's not going to happen. So it's devastating. It's really devastating when you think about what you can and can't do. And I hear people in my friend circle and all over, they say, oh, what do you want to start? Oh, I want to start an e-commerce business, or I want to start, and I want to be a hairdresser. I want to be my own hairdresser. And nobody that I know says, oh, I want to build the next best iPhone. I want to build the next best manufacturing company. I want to build the next biggest tech company that will give IBM a run for their money, or Oracle, or whatever it is. You just don't hear that because it's so hard to compete with these big players that have billions of dollars. And Amazon is one of these people that when you have a really good product, like that toaster that was in the news like a year or so ago, that was really good, had like a touchscreen, a smart toaster. So Amazon bought into that company for a small percentage so they can also use the patent, rebranded as Amazon, and basically forced them out of business and sold them at half price. Because Amazon and Microsoft, Google, all these big companies, and Meta does this with their their Meta glasses and all this other stuff. They can come in and say, hey, I have this new product that's just like yours, but yours is let's say $250. Meta can come in and say, oh, their product is a little bit better, because we don't have the patents to this, to phase 1 and 2. But what we can do is we can sell it at $90 or $75, and we can sell it at a huge loss for years to come, because we will make it back once they go out of business, right? And so that is not fair competing, right? And when I talk about BYD and all these other car companies, and everybody says, we gotta slap tariffs on them, and China subsidizing their car manufacturing. Well, we do the exact same thing. We give grants out to them. We do the exact same thing. It's just that China pays more to subsidize it, and then they'll try to import them for way cheaper. And I know you guys are gonna say, well, they have China is not playing fair. Neither is Apple, Google, or anybody else. And if they would be playing fair, they would never been that big. If a competitor gets too big or too close, they just buy them up. And they probably have acquisition teams, teams that constantly go look out and see, can we buy them at an early stage so they will not become a threat. And if you're an entrepreneur and Google comes in and says, let me just buy you guys for a few $100 million. What's nothing for Google? And the founder's like, oh, 200, 300 million bucks for me? That's great. Let me just do it. And then they're sold, then they give it to Google, and then Google doesn't have to compete anymore. And it's just a matter of days, a few days till Google gets all their money back from ads and whatnot, and they're back to it. So I don't know. I think entrepreneurship is pretty much in the toaster right now. I don't know about you guys. Let me know in the comments and let me know what kind of topics I should do, because why not? It's a beautiful day in Las Vegas, and I will see you in the next one.